The Planets of the Double Sun by Neil R. Jones. 1. The Jameson Satellite. Prologue. The Rocket Satellite. In the depths of space, some 20,000 miles from the Earth, the body of Professor Jameson within its rocket container cruised upon an endless journey. In the year 2058, Professor Jameson had sought for a plan whereby he might preserve his body indefinitely after his death. He had worked long and hard upon the subject. Since the time of the pharaohs, the human race had looked for a means by which the dead might be preserved against the ravages of time. Great had been the art of the Egyptians in the embalming of their deceased, a practice which was later lost to humanity of the ensuing mechanical age, never to be rediscovered. But even the embalming of the Egyptians, so Professor Jameson had argued, would be futile in the face of millions of years, the eventual dissolution of the corpses being just as certain as immediate cremation following death. The professor had looked for a means by which the body could be preserved perfectly forever, but eventually he had come to the conclusion that nothing on earth is unchangeable beyond a certain limit of time. Just as long as he sought an earthly means of preservation, he was doomed to disappointment. All earthly elements are composed of atoms which are forever breaking down and building up, but never destroying themselves. A match may be burned, but the atoms are still unchanged, having resolved themselves into smoke, carbon dioxide, ashes, and certain basic elements. It was clear to the professor that he could never accomplish his purpose if he were to employ one system of atomic structure, such as embalming fluid or other concoction, to preserve another system of atomic structure, such as the human body, when all atomic structure is subject to universal change, no matter how slow. He had then soliloquized upon the possibility of preserving the human body in its state of death until the end of all earthly time, to that day when the earth would return to the sun from which it had sprung. Quite suddenly one day, he had conceived the answer to the puzzling problem which had obsessed his mind, leaving him awed with its wild, uncanny potentialities. He would have his body shot into space, enclosed in a rocket to become a satellite of the Earth. He reasoned logically. Any material substance, whether of organic or inorganic origin, cast into the depths of space would exist indefinitely. He had visualized his dead body enclosed in a rocket, flying off into the illimitable maw of space. He would remain in perfect preservation while on Earth, millions of generations of mankind would live and die, their bodies to molder into the dust of the forgotten past. He would exist in this unchanged manner until that day when mankind, beneath a cooling sun, should fade out forever in the chill, thin atmosphere of a dying world, and still his body would remain intact, as perfect in its rocket container as on that day of the far-gone past when it had left the Earth to be hurled out on its career. What a magnificent idea! At first he had been assailed with doubts. Suppose his funeral rocket landed upon some other planet, or, drawn by the pull of our great sun, was thrown into the flaming folds of the incandescent sphere. Then the rocket might continue on out of the solar system, plunging through the endless seas of space for millions of years, to finally enter the solar system of some far-off star, as meteors often enter ours. Suppose his rocket crashed upon a planet or became a captive satellite of some celestial body. It had been at this juncture that the idea of his rocket becoming the satellite of the Earth had presented itself, and he had immediately incorporated it into his scheme. The professor had figured out the amount of fuel necessary to carry the rocket far enough away from the Earth so that it would not turn around and crash, and still not be so far away that the Earth's gravitational attraction would keep it from leaving the vicinity. Like the moon, it would forever revolve around the Earth. He had chosen an orbit 65,000 miles from the Earth for his rocket to follow. The only fears he entertained concerned the huge meteors which careened through space at tremendous rates of speed. He had overcome this obstacle, however, and had eliminated the possibilities of a collision with these stellar juggernauts. In the rocket were installed radium repulsion rays, which swerved all approaching meteors from the path of the rocket. The aged professor had prepared for every contingency and had sat down to rest from his labors, reveling in the stupendous, unparalleled results he would obtain. Never would his body undergo decay, and never would his bones bleach to return to the dust of the earth. His body would remain millions of years in a perfectly preserved state, untouched by the hoary palm of such time as only geologists and astronomers can conceive. With the assistance of a nephew who carried out his instructions and wishes following his death, Professor Jameson was sent upon his pilgrimage into space within the rocket he himself had built. The nephew and heir kept the secret forever locked in his heart. Generation after generation had passed upon its way. Gradually, humanity had come to die out, finally disappearing from the earth altogether. Mankind was later replaced by various other forms of life, which dominated the globe for their allotted spaces of time before they too became extinct. The years piled up on one another, running into millions, and still the Jameson satellite kept its lonely vigil around the Earth, gradually closing the distance between satellite and planet, yielding reluctantly to the latter's powerful attraction. 40 million years later, its orbit ranged some 20,000 miles from the Earth, while the dead world edged ever nearer the cooling sun, whose dull red ball covered a large expanse of the sky. Surrounding the flaming sphere, many of the stars could be perceived through the Earth's thin, rarefied atmosphere. As the Earth cut in slowly and gradually toward the solar luminary, so was the moon revolving ever nearer the Earth, appearing like a great gem glowing in the twilight sky. The rocket, containing the remains of Professor Jameson, continued its endless travel around the great ball of the Earth, whose rotation had now ceased entirely, one side forever facing the dying sun. There it pursued its lonely way, a cosmic coffin accompanied by its funeral cortege of scintillating stars amid the deep silence of eternal space. Solitary it remained, except for the occasional passing of a meteor, flitting by at a remarkable speed on its aimless journey through the vacuum between the far-flung worlds. Would the satellite follow its orbit to the world's end, or would its supply of radium soon exhaust itself after so many eons of time, converting the rocket into the prey of the first large meteor which chanced that way? Would it someday return to the Earth to crash upon the surface of the dead planet? And when the rocket terminated its career, would the body of Professor Jameson be found perfectly preserved, or merely a crumbled mound of dust?